The October heat scorched the lands of the Araguaia Valley when Anthony C. Good parked his dusty pickup truck in the spacious parking lot of the New Hope Events Center in Mato Grosso. He was a simple man, but with a determined gaze, carrying, in his calloused hands, the dreams he had inherited from his father. His wide-brimmed hat, faded by time, shielded his brown eyes from the excessive brightness as he walked toward the imposing shed where the annual Naylor cattle auction would take place. New Hope did not live up to its name for Anthony. In that small town that had grown in the shadow of cattle ranching, his modest farm on the edge of the municipality was considered irrelevant by the local big ranchers. But that didn't stop him from dreaming. He had saved for 5 years for this moment, even selling part of his land to gather enough capital. Lot 58, consisting of 20 cows of excellent genetic lineage, could transform his reality. As he crossed the doors of the air-conditioned hall, he immediately felt the clash of worlds. The room was filled with men in designer shirts, gold watches, and belts with shiny buckles. Waiters circulated with trays of imported whiskey among groups, discussing astronomical figures with the casualness of someone talking about the weather. "Look, who decided to show up?" said Carlos Edward Mendonza, known as Eddie Mendonza, owner of the Dawn Ranch, the largest in the region. "The folks from the bleachers are sitting on the other side, Tony." Muffled laughter followed the comment as Anthony walked toward the registration desk. The receptionist raised her well-groomed eyebrows when he requested his buyer's credential. "Are you sure, sir? The participation fee is $5,000. Non-refundable." "I'm sure, ma'am," he replied firmly, handing over the envelope with the money he had set aside. Minutes later, with the badge hanging around his neck, Anthony took a seat in the front row, ignoring the disapproving glances. He consulted his notes once more, reviewing the maximum amounts he could offer without jeopardizing his property. The auctioneer, Morris Portman, was known throughout the Midwest for his ability to extract impressive amounts from buyers. Wearing an impeccable navy blue suit and with a powerful voice amplified by the microphone, he took the stage as the clock struck exactly 2 in the afternoon. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that we begin the 30th Elite Naylor Auction of the Araguaia Valley. Today we have exceptional lots that will certainly please the most demanding breeders in the country." Anthony followed each bid attentively, observing the dynamics of the event. The first lots were sold for amounts that made his stomach tighten. He realized that his calculations, based on previous auctions, were outdated. The market had heated up even more. When the auctioneer announced Lot 58, Anthony felt his mouth go dry. The 20 cows entered the ring, displaying perfect conformation, impeccable white coats, and the docility characteristic of the lineage. It was exactly what he needed to take his breeding program to the next level. "Starting bid of $200,000. Who will offer more for this exceptional lot?" proclaimed Portman. Anthony raised his numbered paddle, feeling all eyes converge on him. A momentary silence filled the room, soon replaced by murmurs of surprise and mockery. "I have 200,000. Who will top that?" 220, shouted Ronald Fonseca from the St. Agnes Ranch without taking his eyes off Anthony. 240, replied Anthony, keeping a neutral expression. What followed was a succession of bids that seemed more like a game to humiliate him than a legitimate commercial dispute. Every time Anthony matched a bid, another rancher entered the fray, forcing him to go higher. 380,000. "Is Tony still in the game?" taunted Eddie Mendonza, eliciting laughter from the crowd. "You'll have to sell your underwear to pay for this, huh?" The auctioneer hesitated before accepting Anthony's next bid, as if doubting his financial capacity. "Are you sure, sir? That's $400,000. "I am," Anthony replied curtly, feeling his face burn with indignation. When the bid reached $480,000, well above what he had initially planned, Anthony realized he was being dragged into a trap. But he couldn't back down now. He had come this far, faced the contempt and the taunts. His father had always said that opportunities like this came once in a lifetime. $500,000, he announced firmly, causing a stir among the attendees. Eddie Mendonza leaned toward the group around him, making a comment that provoked laughter. 550,000, he shouted, raising his paddle with a mocking smile. Anthony felt his blood run cold. It was more than he could pay without severely compromising his future. He was about to lower his eyes when an unfamiliar voice echoed through the hall. $1 million. The silence was absolute. Everyone, including the auctioneer, turned in astonishment to locate the source of the bid that had doubled the value of the dispute. In the last row, a middle-aged man, dressed discreetly in a blue dress shirt, held his paddle high. His calm demeanor contrasted with the shock on the faces around him. $1 million, repeated the auctioneer, almost breathless. We have $1 million for lot 58. Anyone else? The silence persisted. Not even Eddie Mendonza, known for his stubbornness in disputes, dared to speak up. 1 million going once. 1 million going twice. Anthony watched the scene without understanding what was happening. The gavel fell with a sharp sound that echoed through the hall. Sold to number 147. The crowd began to whisper frantically, trying to identify the mysterious buyer who had paid double the market value for that lot. Anthony felt a mix of disappointment and relief. He had lost the lot, but at least he had been spared the humiliation of a possible default. He was about to get up when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw the man from the last row, now handing him a discreet card. Raphael Montgomery, he introduced himself with a slight smile. We need to talk, Mr. Good. The lot is yours. Anthony observed Raphael Montgomery's office with a mix of confusion and suspicion. Located on the 10th floor of New Hope's only commercial building, the space exuded understated elegance. Through the large window, one could see the entire expanse of the city, stretching to the first farms marking the transition to the countryside. You must be wondering why a stranger would pay $1 million for a lot of cattle, only to offer it to a small producer, said Raphael, serving 2 cups of coffee. I confess I am, replied Anthony, still reluctant to accept the situation. I don't believe in miracles, Mr. Montgomery. Raphael smiled, settling into the chair across from Anthony. Neither do I. I believe in justice and good business, in that order. He opened a folder on the table and slid some documents toward Anthony. I knew your father, John Good. We worked together many years ago before I moved to Chicago. The mention of his father, who had passed away 3 years earlier, made Anthony shiver. John had been a man of integrity, whose small property had been earned through decades of hard work as a foreman on regional ranches. My father never mentioned you, Anthony commented, flipping through the documents distractedly. We were young. I worked for the agribusiness bank at the time. Your father taught me everything about cattle when I arrived from the East Coast, knowing nothing about the business. Raphael paused, as if choosing his words carefully. He helped me when no one else believed in me. Now, I'm in a position to repay the favor to the Good family. The documents on the table revealed something Anthony had never imagined. They were detailed reports of a sophisticated price manipulation scheme in regional auctions. The big ranchers, led by Eddie Mendonza, coordinated their bids to keep prices artificially high or exceptionally low, depending on who was interested in the lots. I've been monitoring these activities for almost 2 years, Raphael explained. I'm a financial consultant now, specializing in agribusiness. Several small clients complained about suspicious practices, but it was difficult to gather concrete evidence. Anthony studied the charts showing clear patterns of manipulation. This explains why I've never been able to acquire good animals in previous auctions. Exactly. They keep small producers excluded from the superior genetics market. Raphael leaned forward. But the scheme has a fundamental flaw. It depends on predictability. No one expected someone to double an already inflated bid. Anthony's mind worked quickly, connecting the dots. You use the auction to expose the scheme? Partially, but also to give you a legitimate chance. Raphael pointed to another document. This is a partnership contract. Lot 58 will be transferred to your property tomorrow. You'll pay the real market value, approximately $400,000, in installments compatible with your financial capacity. The rest I consider an investment in the future of the region's cattle industry." Anthony felt his throat tighten. It was an offer too generous to be true. "And what's your interest in all this, Mr. Montgomery?" "Beyond honoring your father's memory?" Raphael smiled. "Let's say I have an interest in destabilizing certain regional monopolies, and I believe in your potential, Anthony. I've read about your sustainable management techniques and the results you've achieved even with limited resources." The meeting stretched on for hours as they detailed the terms of the partnership. By the end, Anthony left the office with a sense of unreality. In a single day, his life had completely transformed. The next morning, news of the $1 million bid was already circulating throughout New Hope. Speculations about the buyer's identity and intentions dominated conversations in the town's establishments. When Anthony arrived at the agricultural registry to formalize the transfer of the animals, he found Eddie Mendonza and Ronald Fonseca waiting in the lobby. Well, if it isn't our friend Tony," said Mendonza with a forced smile. "We heard you're getting that magnificent lot. Must have made a deal with the devil, huh?" Anthony ignored the taunt, heading to the service counter. "Don't be so standoffish, boy," Mendonza insisted, following him. "We're curious to know how a small producer suddenly got so much money." "Maybe he inherited from some rich relative," suggested Ronald with malice. "Or maybe he's laundering money for someone." Anthony turned slowly, facing the two men. "Unlike you gentlemen, I don't need schemes to prosper, just hard work and honest partnerships." Something in the firmness of his gaze made the mocking smiles falter. Before they could respond, the door of the registry office opened and Raphael Montgomery entered, accompanied by two people Anthony didn't know. "Good morning, gentlemen," Raphael greeted naturally. "I see you're already aware of our transaction." Eddie Mendonza narrowed his eyes, studying the newcomer. "And who might you be?" "Raphael Montgomery, financial consultant." He extended his hand, which Mendonza reluctantly shook. "I'm advising Mr. Good on his new ventures." "Ventures," repeated Ronald, exchanging glances with Mendonza. "Yes, Good agribusiness is expanding," Raphael replied calmly. "In fact, I'd like to introduce Dr. Marina Carson, an agribusiness law specialist, and Dr. Paul Seaborn, an independent auditor." The two professionals greeted the group with discreet nods. The atmosphere had changed drastically. Mendonza's expression oscillated between disbelief and concern. "If you'll excuse us, we have a transfer to finalize," Raphael concluded, guiding Anthony into the registry office. As he signed the documents, Anthony couldn't help but think about the implications of that encounter. The men who had always looked down on him now watched him with suspicion, and perhaps the beginnings of respect. In the days that followed, the 20 cows were installed on Anthony's property. Under the guidance of specialists recommended by Raphael, he implemented improvements to the facilities to properly accommodate the high-value genetic animals. The initial investment was significant, but projections indicated substantial returns in the coming years. However, the apparent tranquility didn't last long. 2 weeks after the auction, the first rumor began circulating in town. Anthony Good was just a front in a money-laundering scheme. The story, clearly planted by someone with an interest in defaming him, gained traction among the region's cattle ranchers. "We can't ignore this," Raphael warned during a visit to the property. "They're trying to discredit you before you establish yourself as a legitimate competitor." Anthony watched the animals in the newly formed pasture, thoughtful. "What do you suggest we do?" "Counterattack," Raphael replied with a determined gleam in his eye. "It's time to reveal what we know about the auction cartel. We just need to find the perfect moment." The opportunity came sooner than expected. The Nelore Breeders Association of the Araguaia Valley had called an extraordinary meeting to discuss concerning commercial practices in the regional market. It was evident to those following the behind-the-scenes developments that the meeting was targeting Anthony and his mysterious partner. "They expect to corner us," Raphael commented, analyzing the official notice Anthony had received. "But they don't know we have an ace up our sleeve." On the day of the meeting, the association's auditorium was packed. Producers of all sizes, traders, and industry professionals occupied the chairs arranged in a semicircle. In the front row, Eddie Mendoza and his closest allies wore confident smiles. When Anthony entered, accompanied by Raphael and attorney Marina, a murmur spread through the room. It wasn't common to see a small producer with a legal team at such meetings. The association's president, George Nunes, a grey-haired man who had held the position for decades due to the influence of large producers, opened the meeting with visible discomfort. "We're here to discuss recent irregularities in the market," he announced hesitantly. "There are concerns about the origin of certain funds and the legitimacy of some transactions." Everyone knew exactly which irregularities he was referring to. All eyes turned to Anthony, who maintained a serene expression. "Before the discussion proceeds," Raphael interrupted, standing up, "we'd like to make a brief presentation we believe is relevant to the topic." Nunes hesitated, glancing sideways at Mendoza, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Proceed, Mr. Montgomery, but be brief." Raphael walked to the projector, connecting his laptop. The screen lit up with a complex chart showing bidding patterns from dozens of auctions over the past 5 years. The title was blunt: Systematic Price Manipulation in Araguaia Valley Auctions. A tomb-like silence filled the auditorium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Raphael began in a clear, firm voice, "what we have here is irrefutable statistical evidence of an organized cartel artificially controlling elite cattle prices in the region." The projected data was devastating. It clearly showed how a select group of producers coordinated their bids, harming both small buyers and sellers who weren't part of the scheme. "This isn't just unethical," Raphael continued, advancing. To the next slide, "it constitutes an economic offense, subject to severe penalties under Law 125229/2011. In the audience, faces paled. Eddie Mendoza had completely lost his confident smile, his eyes fixed on the screen with growing apprehension. "And now," Raphael announced, displaying a new set of documents, "allow me to explain how this scheme is about to collapse." The silence hanging over the auditorium was almost palpable. The charts and documents projected by Raphael Montgomery exposed with mathematical precision the scheme that had controlled the region's auctions for years. In the audience, discomfort was visible on the faces of those involved, while small producers watched with a mix of indignation and relief at finally understanding why they had never been able to compete on equal footing. "We have here," Raphael continued, pointing to a detailed table, "records of communications between the main participants of this cartel before each major auction in the past 3 years. Messages defining who will win each lot and for how much." Eddie Mendoza stood up abruptly, his face red with fury. "This is slander. I'll sue you for defamation." Raphael remained unperturbed. "Feel free, Mr. Mendoza. All documents have already been sent to the Administrative Council for Economic Defense and the Public Prosecutor's Office, including the recordings." "What recordings?" asked George Nunes, the association's president, his voice trembling. In response, Raphael played an audio clip in which Mendoza's voice was clearly recognizable, coordinating bid amounts with other producers before the auction, where Anthony had tried to acquire Lot 58. "That Tony can't get the lot under any circumstances," the recorded voice said. "We'll push the price until he gives up, then cancel among ourselves." Murmurs of astonishment spread through the auditorium. Anthony watched the scene with a strange sense of detachment, as if watching a movie in which, somehow, he was the protagonist without having chosen the role. "You can't do this," protested Ronald Fonseca, standing beside Mendoza. "It's illegal to record people without consent." "Actually," interjected Marina Carson, the attorney accompanying Raphael, "the recording was made in a public space during a professional event and documents economic offenses. It's perfectly admissible as evidence." Chaos erupted in the auditorium. Small producers, silenced for years, began speaking up, recounting episodes where they had been harmed by the scheme. Mendoza's allies tried to suppress the accusations, but it was clear the situation had spiraled out of control. George Nunes, visibly shaken, banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "This meeting is adjourned until further notice," he announced, quickly fleeing the stage toward the nearest exit. In the weeks that followed, New Hope experienced a true revolution. An official investigation was formally opened, with testimonies collected and documents seized from the headquarters of the main ranches involved in the scheme. The case gained national attention, with special reports on market manipulation in Brazilian agribusiness. While the public storm intensified, Anthony focused on developing his property. With the technical support provided by his partnership with Raphael, he implemented an artificial insemination program that promised exceptional results from the valuable genetic material of the acquired cows. The true potential of these animals will begin to show next year, explained Dr. Vincent Almeida, a bovine genetics specialist hired to advise the project. If we maintain this pace, in 5 years, the herd at Hope Ranch will be a regional benchmark. Anthony smiled at hearing the name he had recently given to his property. Hope seemed fitting for the fresh start he was experiencing. One morning, while supervising the construction of the new handling center, Anthony received an unexpected visit. Luisa Mendonça, Eddie's daughter, appeared at the farm's entrance driving a jeep. Unlike her father, she was known for her discreet demeanor and for managing social projects funded by the family group. "Good morning, Mr. Good," she greeted formally. "May I have a moment of your time?" Intrigued, Anthony invited her to the porch of the main house where they could overlook the property. Luisa seemed nervous, choosing her words carefully. "I've come without my father's knowledge," she began. "The situation at Dawn Ranch is complicated. Banks have suspended credit lines, suppliers are demanding upfront payments, and traditional buyers are hesitant to close deals while the investigation is ongoing." Anthony listened attentively, showing no satisfaction at the troubles of the man who had humiliated him. "I understand we have no right to ask for any consideration," Luisa continued. "But there are 400 employees who depend on the ranch, entire families who aren't responsible for my father's actions or those of his associates." The mention of the workers struck a chord with Anthony. He came from a family that had served large landowners for generations. He knew well the vulnerability of those who relied on ranch wages to survive. "What exactly are you proposing, Miss Mendonça?" he asked finally. "A transition," she replied with renewed firmness. "My father is willing to step aside from management. We're restructuring the entire leadership of the group and implementing a corporate governance program with permanent external auditing." Anthony studied her face, searching for signs of deceit. "And why come to me with this?" "Because your voice carries weight now," she explained. "If you and Mr. Montgomery publicly endorse the changes, it would help us negotiate with suppliers and clients." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Anthony. Just a few months ago, he had needed the Mendonça's approval to be taken seriously in the market. Now the roles were reversed. "I'll need to consult my partner," Anthony replied after a long pause, "but I must warn you that any agreement will require full transparency and reparations for the producers harmed over the years." Luisa nodded, visibly relieved by the lack of an immediate refusal. As she left, she handed him a folder detailing the proposed restructuring of the Mendonça Group. That evening, Anthony and Raphael reviewed the proposal carefully. "It's a solid plan," Raphael admitted, "and strategically, it would benefit us to support it with a few additional conditions." "Such as?" Anthony asked. "First, that the new administrative structure include a board with representatives from small and medium producers," Raphael explained. "Second, that the Mendonça Group fund a regional cooperative to democratize access to top genetics. And third, that they transfer part of their auction company's shares to this cooperative." The proposal was bold, but reflected the new reality of the region. With the investigation ongoing and public opinion largely in favor of change, the Mendonças had little bargaining power. To Anthony's surprise, the counter-proposal was accepted with minimal adjustments. A month later, at a formal ceremony held at the Breeders' Association headquarters, the creation of the Fertile Valley Cooperative was announced. It would coordinate transparent auctions and genetic improvement programs accessible to producers of all sizes. Eddie Mendonça, now removed from the presidency of the group bearing his name, attended the ceremony with an inscrutable expression. At the end of the event, he approached Anthony, who was speaking with a group of small producers excited about the new prospects. "You've won, Tony," he said quietly, using the derogatory nickname for the last time. "You've destroyed everything I built over 40 years. Anthony looked at the man who had so often belittled him, noticing how much smaller he seemed now, without the aura of power that had always surrounded him. "I didn't destroy anything, Mr. Mendonça," Anthony replied calmly. "I just helped build something better, something that benefits everyone, including your family. You could have done this long ago." Without waiting for a response, Anthony turned back to the group waiting for him. Deep down, he felt no resentment. The transformation happening in the Araguaia Valley was bigger than any personal rivalry. 6 months after the fateful auction, the first calf born at Hope Ranch caught the attention of experts for its exceptional quality. It was just the beginning of the revolution Anthony had started. The results of the genetic improvement program exceeded even the most optimistic expectations, attracting technical visits from producers across the country. On a sunny May afternoon, as Anthony guided a group of veterinary students touring the property, he received the call that would definitively change his position in the national cattle industry. "Mr. Good," said the formal voice on the other end, "this is Rachel Sampier, Executive Secretary of the National Cattlemen's Confederation. I'd like to confirm if you've received our invitation to join the Technical Council for Genetic Improvement." The invitation had arrived the previous week, but Anthony was still hesitant to accept. It meant frequent trips to Washington, D.C., and a level of public exposure he had never sought. "I'm considering the invitation, Dr. Sampier," he replied honestly. "I understand your hesitation," she continued, "but let me emphasize that your experience is exactly what we need. A producer who built excellence from limited resources, who values the inclusion of small breeders, and who has an ethical vision for the market." After ending the call, Anthony walked to the top of the hill, marking the northern boundary of his property. From there he gazed at the lush pastures where his now renowned herd grazed peacefully. He thought of his father, John, and how proud he would have been to see what he had achieved. "I think you should accept," Raphael said, appearing quietly beside him. "The industry needs voices like yours in decision-making spaces." "What about the ranch, the animals?" Anthony asked, though he already knew the answer. "The structure we've built works well even when you're away. Besides," Raphael added with a smile, "I need to justify my investment, don't I?" 2 weeks later, Anthony Good was sworn in as a member of the Technical Council at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. At the podium, before an audience of the nation's top agribusiness leaders, he delivered a brief but impactful speech. "I bring with me the voice of the thousands of small producers who, like me, believe that excellence in cattle breeding shouldn't be the privilege of a few. The future of our industry depends on democratizing knowledge, technology, and opportunities." He paused, looking directly at the cameras broadcasting the event. "The story of Hope Ranch proves that when artificial barriers are removed, talent and dedication can flourish anywhere." The applause was warm. Among the attendees were several ranchers from the Araguaia Valley, including Luisa Mendonça, who had officially assumed the presidency of the family group, now renamed the Dawn Group. The following week, the cover of the nation's leading agribusiness magazine featured Anthony alongside his award-winning Nelore cows, with the headline, "The New Face of American Cattle Breeding, How a Small Producer Revolutionized the Bovine Genetics Market." The article detailed not only his personal rise, but also the structural changes he had catalyzed, transforming one of the nation's most traditional and closed regions into a model of transparency and collaboration among producers of all sizes. In Yao, the conclusion the journalist highlighted. The true revolution led by Anthony Good isn't in the exceptional quality of his herd, but in the living proof that American cattle breeding has much to gain when it abandons oligopolistic practices and opens space for innovation from all sectors. On a starry night sitting on his porch, Anthony reread the article while sipping coffee. Beside him, Raphael reviewed financial projections for the coming year. "It's impressive how much has changed in just a year," Raphael remarked, closing the document folder. "From a marginalized producer to a national reference." Anthony smiled, gazing at the nighttime landscape of his property, where the lights of the new Genetic Research Center twinkled in the distance. You know what my father used to say, that true opportunities come once in a lifetime, and when they do, we must have the courage to seize them, even when everyone doubts. Your father was a wise man, Raphael replied. He was, Anthony agreed, raising his cup in a silent toast to John's memory. And wherever he is, he must be proud to see that his struggle wasn't in vain. That respect isn't bought with money or power, but earned through honest work and determination. The next day, as Anthony presented the results of the first auction, organized by the Fertile Valley Cooperative, he couldn't help but notice the irony of fate. In the same space where he had faced humiliation a year earlier, he was now met with respect and admiration. The world turned, and with it, the fortunes of men. But some values remained unchanged. The dignity, honesty, and perseverance his father had taught him from a young age. As he watched new breeders, once excluded from the elite circuit, actively participating in the bidding, Anthony knew this was just the beginning of an even greater transformation. The Araguaia Valley, once dominated by a few, was now opening to a future of collaboration and shared prosperity. A quiet revolution, sparked by an unexpected bid in an auction that should have destroyed him, but instead elevated not only his life, but that of an entire community.